Hello, my name is Andrew Sandrini, and welcome to my Kirka presentation on the Native American perspective on derogatory sports mascots, such as the formerly known Washington Redskins and the formerly known Cleveland Indians. My interest in this topic began when I read the prologue to There, written by Cheyenne and Arapaho author Tommy Orange, pictured right here. The quote reads, "We have all the logos and mascots, the copy of a copy of the image of an Indian in a textbook, all the way from the top of Canada, the top of Alaska, down to the bottom of South America. Indians were removed, then reduced to a featherhead image. Our heads are on flags, jerseys, and coins." Now, this is not something that is a modern thing. Native American mascots and logos have been used for over a century. However, in 2021, things are finally starting to change, and people are starting to realize how racist and insulting these mascots truly are to the Native American community. There has been an ongoing debate as to whether the names and logos should be changed. Dan Snyder, pictured right here, the owner of the Washington football team, previously known as the Washington Redskins, has been adamant about not changing the name until recently. And in 2013, he has been quoted as saying, "We will never change the name of the team." The reason Snyder decided to change the name came after the death of George Floyd on May 25, 2020. After that happened, multiple NFL teams began to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and Snyder began to not only receive criticism from fans, but also team investors regarding the name of the team. Those team investors included but are not limited to FedEx, Nike, and Pepsi, sponsors that own over $600 billion in shares that threaten to end the relationship with the team unless Snyder changed the name. And on July 3, 2020, Snyder gave in to the demands, declaring the team will undergo a thorough review of its name. Ever since that day, the team has been known as the Washington football team. For the Native American community, the battle against racist mascots is much bigger than sports. Sundance, a member of the Muscogee tribe, also the director of the Cleveland branch of the American Indian Movement, which is a group focused on changing these mascots, has led successful efforts in changing these mascots, starting with the Oberlin Senior High School mascot, which was originally the Indians and are now known as the Phoenix. He was quoted in 2020 saying, "There are so many issues that we need to address as Indigenous people that are certainly more important than the mascot issue. But it is the mascot issue, among others, that prohibits people from seeing Indigenous people as people." For decades, Sundance and others have been working relentlessly to convince teams to change their names. They have filed multiple lawsuits, held protests, and pressured team sponsors. Billy Red Wing Tyak, pictured right here, chief of the Piscataway Indian tribe, is another prominent activist in the fight for changing the mascots. Chief Tyak is hailing from 5 generations of activists and has been a leader in changing the Washington Redskins name and mascots, especially since he is a member of the Washington community and a fan of the team. He was quoted in 2020 saying, "The name is racist. That's what you've got to understand. Don't believe what I tell you? Look it up in Webster's dictionary for the Washington football team. I don't like to say the word, but it's redskin. See what it means? It's a racial slur for Native Americans. It's derogatory." As previously mentioned, Chief Tyak is a citizen of Washington, D.C., and also a big football fan of the team. But however, it is very difficult for him to support the team, because he refuses to own any merchandise other than a magnet that reads, "Love the team, hate the name." Chief Tyak also found it extremely difficult to celebrate the team's accomplishments when they won multiple Super Bowls in the 1980s and 1990s. Chief Tyak wants people to understand that even though the Washington football team plans on retiring their insensitive mascot, the fight is not over. According to 538 Analysis, hundreds of schools across the United States still use Native American themes as their mascots, names that are considered insensitive and racist towards the Native American community. These names include but are not limited to warriors, braves, and Indians. In 2005, the American Psychological Association, also known as the APA, requested that all Native American-themed mascots in professional sports and high school and collegiate sports retire their names. The APA believes that the use of Native American mascots for schools and universities is particularly troubling, considering schools are places for learning, and these mascots teach misleading, stereotypical, and insulting beliefs towards Native Americans. Research has shown that the continued use of American Indian mascots, symbols, images, and personalities has a negative effect on not only American Indian students, but all students. We know from the literature that oppression, covert and overt racism, and perceived racism can have serious negative consequences for the mental health of American Indian and Alaska Native people. The discontinued use of American Indian mascots is a gesture to show that this kind of racism toward and the disrespect of all people in our country in the larger global text will not be tolerated. And that was psychologist who works for the American Psychological Association was quoted with saying that in 2011. And this idea applies to characters in There like Orville Redfeather and Edwin Black, who are curious about their Native American roots, but only know things like the depictions of their culture through these mascots. There are still multiple professional, high school, and collegiate teams that use Native Americans as their mascots, including the Chicago Blackhawks, the Florida State Seminoles, and the Atlanta Braves. However, there is one team that is ahead of the curve. Amidst all the protests and lawsuits against Dan Snyder and the Washington Redskins to get them to change their name, the Major League Baseball team formerly known as the Cleveland Indians decided it would be best to change their name from the Indians to the Guardians. And the team actually fully retired their Indian name and logo this past Friday on November 19th, 2021. These are my sources for my project. Thank you so much for listening.